Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, Sue, Reigetsu. So good to see you again. I'm just gonna spotlight both of us here. So I don't want to go into gory details, but you've been on quite a journey the last week and have just come back to the States from being abroad. So thanks so much for being willing to do this anyway. And I'm really looking forward to your talk, Alive Until You're Dead, I believe. This is very exciting to think about. And just a few words about Sue. So Reigetsu Susan Moon has been practicing in the Zen tradition. I didn't want to quite start recording yet. It's okay. For 35 years and is a lay teacher with the Everyday Zen Sangha. Her previous books include the cult classic, The Life and Letters of Tofu Roshi, and This Is Getting Old, Zen Thoughts on Aging. If you're not already excited, then you can check those out. For many years, she edited Turning Wheel, the journal of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, and she teaches writing workshops, as well as being a serious student of photography and an enthusiastic grandmother. So, and very importantly, she co-authored The Hidden Lamp, which is a collection of koans about women. And she did this with Zenshin Florence Kaplow, who is going to do the next koan, Deepa Ma and the Thief, on May 21st in just a couple days. And so everyone could sign up for that if you wish. But thank you so much for writing that book, for your work throughout the world on both koans and women and engaged practice and Zen. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Noah, for welcoming me. And thanks to Roshi Joan for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be part of the extended Upaya Sangha, especially now when Upaya is offering so much to the world. It has been for a long time, but ever since the pandemic, it just seems like it's particularly offering so much to the difficult times we're in, to people in these difficult times. And I'm really grateful for that. And I have enjoyed teaching here before, and I have taught with Florence Kaplow a couple of times on the Hidden Lamp, and it's so great that she's doing these ongoing study groups. And I also really appreciated my opportunity to be part of the fall practice period last fall on the Vimalakirti Sutra, and I enjoyed teaching at that time too. So it's kind of a little bit of a home for me to be here talking at Upaya. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about my just published book, which is called Alive Until You're Dead, and offering some thoughts about it. And I guess at the outset, I want to mention the fact that my writing is very personal. My essays are personal, about my own, arising out of my own experience. And this is not because I'm such an important person for you to read about at all, but because I'm the human being I know best. And so this is how I'm able to talk about what it means to be a human being and my explorations on the matter. And I'm hoping that my experience connects with yours. It's just my way of writing. So the book is a collection of essays on different aspects of mortality. The subtitle is Notes on the Home Stretch. Notes on the Home Stretch. But it's not really about aging, as This Is Getting Old was focused on aging, but this book is more focused on mortality. And of course, you may have noticed that there's quite a high correlation between aging and mortality. They do often seem to be connected. But my purpose is really to ask how does the fact that I'm going to die change my experience of being alive? And we all have this question, we all are going to die. And what does this do for us? Does it do anything for us? Or can it do anything besides inspire fear? Buddha taught that impermanence is one of the 3 marks of existence. So this is about impermanence, these questions. And we tend to think of impermanence as something we don't like. But impermanence is about arrivals as well as departures. It's about birth as well as death. And in the winter, the plum trees are bare, no leaves or flowers on the tree, but that's not permanent. That's impermanent. In the spring, the plum tree is full of blossoms. So that's the birth part of impermanence. A person might say, plum blossoms are all very well, but I still don't want to die. But just think how horrible it would really be if we never died. If you didn't ever die, what would you do all day? What would a day mean anyway, if there was an infinite succession of them? Maybe you'd wake up in the morning and say, oh no, not again, not another one. And generations would be meaningless. Our children and grandchildren wouldn't be so cute after a while. They'd just turn into some other wrinkled up old people crowding up the planet. So let's face it, dying is something that we should be glad to do in a way. And while we still have a body, a living body, not dying would be really problematical. We'd keep on getting older. We'd have to take more and more supplements. We'd be endlessly going to the doctor, getting one thing after another replaced. So as long as we're living in human bodies on planet Earth, let's be grateful we're going to die. After our body lets us out and we join seamlessly with the rest of the universe, then maybe that's the time to think about being immortal. I don't know yet, or maybe it's the time to think about coming back and helping out some more because there's unfinished business still to do. But in the meantime, while we're here, we do know that we're impermanent. So I want to start, I'm going to be reading excerpts from the book, and I think I'll start with reading a story from the introduction. One day, when I was about 8 years old, I persuaded my best friend that it would be fun to get lost on purpose, to see what it feels like to be lost. I was curious. Children were always getting lost in books and fairy tales and entering enchanted territory. I wanted to make a border crossing too. My friend agreed. In those days, my parents let me have the run of the neighborhood, a quiet residential part of town where I knew the neighbors and they knew me. So we told my parents we were going out to play, and we slipped away. It was a sunny Sunday morning, and the streets were quiet with hardly any cars. We walked to the end of my block, turned, zigzagged, circled, taking unfamiliar streets, lanes, alleys, deliberately not looking back, not keeping track, though I was aware that we were mostly going down. We passed from a neighborhood of single-family houses into a neighborhood of duplexes and triplexes. We were together and we were excited. After a while, we stopped and looked around, and we didn't know which way was home. We had accomplished our mission. We were lost. I felt a rush of adrenaline that sharpened my senses. I smelled the toasty smell of dry maple leaves in the gutter. I saw how the sky wheeled above us between the unfamiliar roofs on either side of the street. I was lost, but there I was, really there in that place. We were explorers, just the right amount scared, or maybe a little beyond just right. We followed our noses and headed uphill. It began to feel like a long time that we'd been gone, and our thoughts turned to our parents. Would they have noticed we were gone? We walked and walked, and at last we came to a street I recognized. After that, we found our way easily. As we approached my house, we saw on the front porch all 4 of our parents standing shoulder to shoulder, peering out. They were worried. They were mad. They had called the police. My parents told me I must never, ever go off again like that without telling them. As punishment, I wasn't allowed to go to the dog show in Boston Garden that afternoon with the rest of the family. Getting lost on purpose seems like a strange way to find yourself, but I think that's what an explorer does. I'm a seeking old person as I was a seeking child. I'm curious by nature, and all of my life I've been wondering, what does it mean to be a human being? Now I ask, what does it mean to be an old human being who is going to die? What's the point of life if you're going to die anyway? The question sounds dreary, but it's not. It's a question born of a bright curiosity. So, one of the themes of the book turned out to be ancestors. And this is a very Buddhist theme, as you know. Ancestors exist because of mortality, because people are born and die generation after generation. And I know you've been studying ancestors at Upaya. So I want to read from some chapters that pertain to ancestors. And first, I'm going to read from a chapter called We Will Be Ancestors Too. Zen people talk a lot about how great the Buddhist ancestors are. I used to take a dim view of the whole business of honoring ancestors when I first started practicing. I loved my grandparents, but not because they were ancestors. When I first began to practice in my 30s, I was impatient with the emphasis on the lineage, a long list of dead men's names from India, China, and Japan. About 15 years ago, or maybe more, I'm not sure exactly, thanks to pressure from women practitioners and our male allies, we began chanting the names of women ancestors as well as men in our formal Zen services, a historic turn. But in my early days, I thought the lineage a dusty business, like a pile of tattered diplomas on crumbling parchment, having nothing to do with me or my life. Now I realize that the ancestors are my lifeblood. We are all made of the ancestors who came before us, those who bore us, and those who bore the ones who bore us, all the way back through the generations to great-grandmother and great-grandfather amoeba. Some of our ancestors may not have been admirable people, but we come from them too, whether we like them or not. People who are adopted may not know who their blood ancestors are, but we come not only from blood ancestors, but also from the people who raised us, who taught us to look both ways before we crossed the street and how to tie our shoes. I'm here because of all the teachers, the first grade teacher who taught me to read, the high school and college teachers who helped me love Shakespeare and George Eliot. Come to think of it, Eliot and Shakespeare are themselves my ancestors, as is everyone who handed on the culture that shapes my consciousness without me even knowing it. I'm talking to you now thanks to the Homo sapiens who first used words and their descendants who kept passing the language along until it got to me, language that organizes what I see and hear, dark, light, square, round, soft, and loud. This is something we rarely stop to think about, but it's really amazing that the language is a gift from our ancestors. I acknowledge the many people who have been robbed of knowing who their biological ancestors are because the link has been broken by slavery, genocide, war, displacement. Also, the people who have been robbed of their cultural and spiritual ancestry as their histories and languages have been torn away from them. But all of us can honor and receive guidance from the tree ancestors, the ocean ancestors, the mountain ancestors, and the star ancestors. When Florence Kaplow and I were compiling The Hidden Lamp, a book that Noah just mentioned about wise Buddhist women of the past, I came to admire all the women ancestors we included in the book. And as I studied these great-great-grandmothers of ours, I made a wonderful discovery about ancestors. You can adopt whoever you want as an ancestor. You don't get to choose your biological parents and grandparents, but when you're adopting ancestors, you get to invite people you admire. the teachers, historical figures, spiritual guides, writers, and artists who have influenced you and encouraged you. You get to invite them to be your ancestors, and they're not going to turn you down. In the Hidden Lamp, there are several stories about a wise old grandmother and lay practitioner in 18th century Japan named Satsujo. I've written and spoken about her before, and here I just want to say that I have adopted her as my third grandmother. I take her with me as I go through life. So I recommend adopting ancestors. Maybe you've already done that yourselves, but you get to carry them with you and realize how they've helped you. So they have already helped us, and they will continue to help us. The other side of honoring our ancestors is remembering that we ourselves will become ancestors. I'm continuing to read from this chapter. This is from the end of the chapter. We will become ancestors ourselves, whether we like it or not. One of my favorite texts is Old Dogen's prayer, or Eihei Kosu Hatsugon Mon, which I think you chant sometimes at Upaya, in which Dogen thanks our ancestors for their great compassion and care for us. And he assures us that we too will be Buddhas and ancestors. I'm going to read as part of this prayer. Buddhas and ancestors of old were as we in the future shall be Buddhas and ancestors. Those who in past lives were not enlightened will now be enlightened. In this life, save the body, which is the fruit of many lives. Before Buddhas were enlightened, they were the same as we. Enlightened people of today are exactly as those of old. So the respected sages of former times were human beings with human feelings and foibles too. Isn't this reassuring? They were stubborn or bossy or afraid. They burned the rice and spilled candle wax on the sutra book. They snuck out of the monastery in the middle of the night to do mischief. Whatever. I've been and done some of those things too. And Dogen says, I'll be an enlightened ancestor even so. We are inevitably the ancestors of all who come after us, whether we have progeny or not. In the meantime, in this life, I need to take good care of my human body, because whether or not it's the fruit of former lives lived by me, it's definitely the fruit of former lives lived by others. My life is the fruit of all my ancestors' lives, and my life is the fruit of the lives of the cows who gave the milk that made the yogurt I had for breakfast this morning, the fruit of the carrots and beans, and even the fruit, the organic strawberries I put in the yogurt. So as not to waste all the lives that have donated themselves to my life, I take care of this body, and while I'm here, I try to be fully here. I try to develop the mind of great compassion. I practice grandmother mind. Playing with my grandchildren, I try not to make the mistakes I made with my children. With grandchildren, it's easier to think it's all good. I try to become a good ancestor. I say to myself, quoting and changing Dogen's prayer, Satsujo was like me. I in the future will be Satsujo. Here's a grandmother story now about my granddaughter, Sally. And I also want to say that I seem to find myself referring a lot to my grandchildren in this talk. It's partly because I'm talking about ancestors, and the parts of the book that are about ancestors tend to be the parts of the book where I also mention grandchildren. But even if you aren't a grandparent, please bear with me. This talk is not just for grandparents. And I speak of my grandchildren because it's a way for me to talk about children in general and to talk about the future and the flow of time. So anyway, here's the part about Sally that I want to tell. This is still in the chapter, We Will Be Ancestors Too. Sally had her 6th birthday while I was on my 3-month intensive retreat at Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, deep in the mountains of California. I couldn't go shopping for a present or order her something online while I was there. So if I wanted to send her a birthday present, I had to make it. She knew I was spending the winter in the cold and rainy mountains and getting up extremely early in order to put on robes and meditate most of the day. We couldn't talk on the phone. I couldn't explain to her why I would do such a strange thing. I wanted to connect with her. So I made her a cloth doll over a period of a few weeks, using my precious breaks and a couple of my days off. The doll, about 12 inches high, was a portrait of Grandma Sue as a monk. Sewing has always been an important, even sacred activity at Tassajara because it's traditional for Soto Zen people to sew their own robes and other ceremonial garments. Monk rag dolls are not traditional, but I felt my doll was infused with Zen power. I had to scavenge all the materials. For the doll's body, I sacrificed an extra wrapping cloth that went with my set of ritual eating bowls, my oryoki bowls. The stuffing for her body was extracted from a burst pillow that was on offer in the Goodwill closet. Her blue button eyes were the inessential collar buttons I poached from an old plaid button shirt. Her black robe was made from an old t-shirt, and her aura of furry white hair, which was very like mine, was made from a frizzed up silk scarf that I found in the Lost and Found. With a red felt-tipped pen, I drew a heart over her heart, like Raggedy Ann has. As I made the doll, I was making myself. I took shape as a Zen monk in my own hands. And when I put the package in the monastery outbox, I was excited to be sending a present of my Zen self to Sally. I didn't feel so far away from her. My son told me later that when Sally showed the doll, which she apparently liked a lot, when she showed the doll to a friend of hers who came over to play, the friend said, "I'm scared of that doll. She looks like a witch." Sally said, "That's not a witch. That's Grandma Sue, and she's a monk at Tassajara." I can imagine her tone of voice, definitive, announcing something perfectly natural and something to be proud of. Maybe after I'm gone beyond, when Sally is getting old herself, she'll come upon the doll and think of her ancestor, the sometimes Zen monk, if their dog Milo hasn't chewed it up in the meantime. Buddhas, I'm repeating from Dogen's prayer. Buddhas and ancestors of old were as we in the future shall be Buddhas and ancestors. When I say I in the future will be Satsujo, I'm saying that I, like the rest of my cohort, will be an ancestor to all who come after me, not just to my own blood descendants or people who knew me. I'm not saying that there will be stories recorded about this distinct me in future Dharma books. What I am saying is that time will take me beyond my personal self to join the river of Buddhas, the continuity of the Dharma. Since we will become ancestors after we die, whether we like it or not, we might as well practice now by loving the beings we meet with grandmother mind, even if we aren't grandmothers and even if they aren't children. Thanks for being my ancestor, Satsujo. So that's from that essay, pieces of it. And now I want to bring forward another perspective on ancestors. And I'll read to you from a chapter called Make Your Body a Sundial. This chapter is about time, the kind of time that Dogen writes about, Uji, the time being, what I think of as deep time. And before I read, I want to mention Joanna Macy here, who's a great friend of Upaya's and a longtime hero of mine. And she's now in her 90s. I know she was going to be teaching here and it got postponed, but she, I'm sure, will be back at Upaya. She's been an environmental activist and a teacher of what she calls the work that reconnects for many decades now. I know that Roshi Joan and others in the Upaya Sangha are closely connected to this work. And I'm mentioning Joanna here because she and Dogen are the two people who've really taught me to understand time differently. They both call on me to remember and honor my ancestors of the past and to bear in mind the generations of the future and to see ourselves as part of the long flow of time. When I first knew Joanna decades ago, I got to know her through working at the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. And she was focusing her activism at that time on the nuclear threat. And she created what she called the Nuclear Guardian Project, bringing our attention to the fact that the nuclear waste that humans create can cause harm to life for thousands and thousands of years. So this was a very literal teaching for me of the truth that we're not separate from those who come after us, way, way after us, or before us. So, of course, the climate crisis is an even more obvious manifestation of the same truth. It's more present now, and we are seeing how we are connected across the generations by both benefit and harm. So now I'll read some excerpts from this essay, the one called Make Your Body a Sundial. Dogen says, each moment is all being, is the entire world. Reflect now whether any being or any world is left out of the present moment. So it's all here, right now, in me and around me, in what Dogen calls the time being. I think of the time being as vertical time in contrast to chronological, sequential time. The ancestors are here with me right now, and the babies who haven't been born yet are here now too, already walking and talking. In the fall of 2011, I spent a day with the California Sacred Sites Peace Walk for a Nuclear-Free World. It was led by Japanese Buddhists and Native Americans. This actually was 6 months after the disaster at the Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan. The walk's twofold purpose was to honor and protect Native American sacred sites and to raise awareness about the danger of nuclear power by visiting local nuclear sites. These two purposes were braided together as one, honoring the ancestors of the past and taking care of the ancestors to come. We visited a Native American burial ground near Mission San Jose, where Indian people were buried in unmarked graves. This is an aside. I believe this was a burial ground that the Ohlone people had been able to acquire in recent decades in order to rebury ancestors who had been disinterred for the sake of developments of various kinds. So we stood in a circle on the bumpy grass, and a wand of burning sage was passed around the circle for healing. The Ohlone leader, Corinna Gould, told us that they had recently reburied a baby there, a baby 2,000 years old, because its remains had been dug up, along with the remains of other ancestors, to make room for a housing development. I wondered, how could a baby be 2,000 years old? We each made an offering of a pinch of tobacco at the center of the circle as 3 young Indians drummed and sang. I thought about the little body going into the ground 2,000 years ago, and then out again, and then in again, the little bones coming apart over the years. Our ancestors were babies. Our babies will be ancestors. It's our job to take care of them. At this moment in time, my grandchildren make real for me the need to take care of the future. That's where they will be living along with all the other children who make it there. I know them now, but I may not know them as adults, and I certainly won't know them when they are middle-aged. They travel far beyond the threshold of my life. My grandmother had a shelf of children's books that had been hers when she was a child back in ancient times, as I thought. Excuse me. I loved to turn the fragile pages and look at the children playing with their hoops and tops. The books were so old, and yet, strangely, they were for children who had been as young as me when they read them. I was also fascinated by my grandmother's old photo albums in which I saw my father as a child in a sailor suit. There was magic in looking at him as a boy. When my granddaughter was very little, she said to me in amazement, "You're my dad's mom." She was trying to absorb this remarkable truth. It's a mystery to me, too. So that's from that chapter. Actually, there's a little bit more I'm going to read, and I want to comment first that the time that we're living in is frightening. It seems to me that it's more frightening than any other time in human history. But the past times were frightening too. Wars, plagues, floods. And to the people of those times, it might have seemed that no time had ever been as frightening. So it's not the first time that people have been worried about what's happening to human life or life on Earth. Dogen's time was a hard time in Japan. So how did those ancestors carry on? Back to my essay. In our arrogance, we sometimes think that history begins with us, forgetting how our lives depend on the struggles of those who came before us. But our predecessors have looked out for us in ways both known and unknown. Not all of them, of course, but thanks are due to the ones who did. What about Lucretia Mott, who fought for the vote for women? What about Frederick Douglass, who helped bring about the end of legalized slavery? Or Rachel Carson, whose work led directly to the banning of DDT? We could chant their names and many others as ancestors. If we want to be helpful to the ones who will come after us, let's show a little gratitude to the ones who came before. How hard is that? We're links in a beautiful chain. Hey, we're part of a parade. There is not, after all, a contradiction between being here now and remembering the many generations behind us and the many generations to come. I like the feeling that my life is a leaf in the generations of leaves. My life is a leaf. I'm a link. I'm a blink. Each moment is all being, is the entire world, as Dogen says. Reflect now whether any being or any world is left out of the present moment. So, impermanence means I'll die. And in the meantime, this is just me talking. This is not me reading. In the meantime, it also means I will keep getting older and older until I do die. And any time is a good time to practice being an ancestor, but old age offers a particularly good opportunity to let go of self-concern. And I want to turn to this whole matter of letting go now. I would say that letting go of self-concern is, for me, my most essential practice, my ongoing vow, and it's very much a work in progress. I'm still struggling with it sometimes. Letting go of self-clinging. But that way lies freedom, we're told, we're taught, and I believe it. So I'm going to be ending soon. I'm not going to take up the whole time here, I don't think, but I'm turning now this slightly different emphasis on on letting go of self-clinging as an older person. And I'm going to read to you from an essay called If I Can Still Love. A few decades ago, when I still thought of old age as a terrible disease that I hoped would never happen to me, a Dharma brother at Berkeley Zen Center overturned my assumptions in a moving talk about his experience of getting old. I often reflect on it. He said that in his old age, it came naturally to him to put himself aside and not think about what he needed all the time. This was a great relief, he said, after decades of planning his life path, developing his career, his skills, his family life, and building an addition to his house. That was all behind him now, and he was at last free to stop thinking about himself. With no agenda of his own, he could fully delight in playing with his 3-year-old grandson, whose happiness was important to him, was as important to him as his own. They could build a tower together and knock it over, build it again, and then knock it over again, laughing uproariously every time. You've probably had that experience with a small child. All of you know what that's like. You have to do it again and again and again. Wow, in that moment in the Zendo, in his talk, I understood that getting old might make it easier to let go of self-clinging. Neither physical strength nor a good memory is required to pile some blocks on top of each other and knock them down again. So, as we know, aging includes losses, and more losses for some people than for other people, but everyone loses something. And in my case, I'm fortunate to be in pretty good physical health. I'm very grateful for that. But my cognitive abilities are definitely on the wane. I'm noticing it. And this is not only inconvenient, but sometimes it's kind of scary. I'm trying to learn to talk about it openly because I think this is a taboo subject, and I think it's helpful to be able to talk about difficulties with changing cognition and just try to face it and be open about it. And not be embarrassed or just make a lot of jokes about it. Sort of annoying jokes like they have on birthday cards all the time. So anyway, I can't think of an example right now, but I think it could be helpful to other people to admit some of the hard things about getting old, particularly in the cognitive department. And I'm doing, I'm functioning fine, but I'm starting to have issues like I used to have a really good sense of direction, and now I find myself losing my bearings quite easily. And I don't even have to make an effort to get lost anymore as I did when I was a child. I get confused about sequential processes. Not long ago, I was helping a friend of mine who needed to take a COVID rapid test, and I had one at my house, and I'd been doing it several times before, and I felt like I was experienced. So I was helping her do it, and I carefully took the cotton swab stick out of the package, and I dipped it carefully into the chemical and rotated it around. And then I opened up the test card, and I very carefully inserted the little swab into the test kit so that it showed up in the window in just the right place. And then I said, okay, now I have to set the timer for 15 minutes. And my friend said, wait, when do I put it in my nose? So that was pretty funny, but it was also, oh my God, this is terrible. Anyway, so to use an idiomatic expression, I sometimes feel like I'm losing my grip. And it just occurred to me, losing my grip, that's it. That's wonderful. That's just the right thing to do. That's letting go of self-clinging, losing my grip. I'm learning to let go. And maybe this gives me a leg up on the Bodhisattva path. I don't know, we'll see. So I'm going to finish by reading a short bit at the end of an essay called If I Can Still Love. And this is a piece about my father. he had a second marriage late in his life, and he had become blind from detached retina. And then he had two more children he never saw. So after he was blind. So my half brothers are actually 40 and 42 years younger than I am. And on this occasion that I'm going to tell you about, I was visiting my father and the kids to help him out while his wife was away at a conference for a few days. And the boys at that time were about 6 and 9. And this was about a year before my father died. Even if you can't do much of anything else, you can love. I think of my father going swimming with his 2 little boys from his late second marriage. My father had 3 strikes against him. He was old, he was blind, and his once wiry runner's legs were swollen and purple from cancer. I was middle-aged, visiting him in Cambridge from California, and one day I drove the 3 of them to the public swimming pool. When I was a child, that same father had been sighted and athletic. Now I watched him and the little boys come out of the men's locker room in their swimming trunks and walk across the slippery, wet tile at the edge of the pool. Please don't slip, please don't fall, I prayed. My father, our father, turned and climbed slowly down the ladder into the pool. Determined to be a good dad, he called to the kids to jump in. He winced when his 6-year-old crashed into his open arms. I could tell it was painful, but my little brother didn't see it, and my father didn't make a noise. Then, joined by the 9-year-old, they played together in the pool, throwing a ball back and forth, my father finding the ball by its splash or its tap on his torso. I'm guessing that his pain was displaced by the joy of swimming with his bouncy boys. It was just about a year before he died. Finally, getting old is about practicing love. Loving is something an old person can do at least as well as a young one. Bad short-term memory can't keep me from loving. Not knowing how to get to the knitting store can't keep me from loving. What I really want to say is that whatever else I lose, I'll be okay as long as I can love. So that is my talk. And I'm done.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was beautiful. And I posted, if anyone on YouTube would like to get the book from Penguin Random House or any of the places, the link is there. And Maya, dear Maya Dore, wrote something that I just think is right on. I always love Sue's combination of quirky humor and wisdom. And if that's not what Zen is, then I don't know. So thank you so much, Sue, for your Zenful talk.
Thank you very much for your help, Kikaku, in making it happen.
Yeah.
And thank you for your talk, by the way. I'm multitasking last week. I really appreciated it. It was very helpful to me.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll finish with the 4 Bodhisattva vows.